Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about some spring book recommendations. These books give spring vibes in like two different ways. The first one is based off of aesthetics and setting, so if the vibes of the book are just very spring-like or florally or nature-based, and then the other half are more like the feeling that spring gives, like new or fresh books or like naturey books, stuff like that. Starting off with a recent read is The Wild Huntress, and this falls into honestly both categories because it's a very nature focused book. It is also very like folklore based, and yeah, the writing style almost feels like a fairy tale, which to me reads like spring. And basically this follows three characters who want to enter into this wild hunt for very different reasons, because the winners of the hunt get a wish granted from the king. So the three characters team up to win the hunt, and I love this book so much. It is based off of Welsh folklore, and it really does feel like reading a piece of folklore or a fairy tale. And so much of it is set out in nature, and it talks about the different mythical creatures that you can find out in nature. And I just find it so interesting, and I loved all three of the characters, and the plot also really takes an interesting turn, and I just really enjoyed this book. The next book is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, and this is the first book in an adult duology, and it's also a fantasy book based off of Scottish folklore. I feel like folklore based books are very spring like because, as I said, they're very nature based, and that just gives spring vibes. But basically, this is set on an island where it's divided into two sides, the east and the west, and each side are basically enemies. And the two main characters are from the east side, and one of them, Jack, has actually moved away from the island to the mainland to get away. But he receives a letter from the heiress of the east side of the island, basically telling them to come back because they're having an emergency where basically young girls are disappearing off the island and no one can find where they are. And I just love this book so much. I feel like Rebecca Ross did a really good job at writing an adult book. I feel like sometimes when a YA author goes to write an adult book, the only difference between it and their YA books is just the characters' ages. But honestly, this felt like a totally different author. The writing style was just much more mature than her YA books, which I don't have an issue with her YA books at all. Like, honestly, I prefer them. Um, but I loved how distinct the writing style was in comparison to her young adult books. I just feel like she did a really good job at distinguishing the two. And yeah, I just really love this book. The writing is beautiful, the setting is amazing, and yeah, I highly recommend. Another book I think fits perfectly is The Unmaking of June Farrow, which I read last year and absolutely loved. It was one of my favourite books of 2024. And this is set in present day, where the main character, all the women in her family, have a history of turning mad after a certain age. And usually, the sign that they're first starting to go mad is basically they start seeing this red door in random places. And when the main character's grandmother dies, she actually sees the red door herself and decides to go through. And I just love this book so much. It is so beautiful. It's one of the only books in recent years to make me cry. I don't normally cry at books, but the twist in this just had me like so emotional, and I really need to reread this because I loved it so much. I also think Six Crimson Cranes fits the category as well because this book is also fairy tale vibes, like it's based off of the Goose Girl, I think, where the main character, she gets cursed by her stepmother. Her seven brothers get turned into cranes, and she herself gets cursed, where she gets sent into exile, and she cannot speak at all or say anything about her curse. So she basically has to go undercover at this palace as a maid or a cook. It's been a while since I read this book, but I think she's one of the workers at the palace, and she's just not able to tell anyone there that she is secretly the princess who has been cursed. And I just remember loving this book so much. I read it so quickly. One of my favourite tropes in books is when the main character has a secret or a secret identity, and this one's kind of the reverse of that. So instead of them purposely keeping the secret from people, she has a secret that she wants to tell people but she can't. And I just love that so much. Now, this is a more gothic spin on the spring vibes, but I also highly recommend The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This doesn't come out till May, but I love this book so much. I read it in February, and if you saw my February wrap up, you would have seen me ramble about it because I love it. This basically follows this city where they basically owe their lives to these five omens, because the folklore in the city is that the different parts of the city were all fighting, and the omens came and basically saved them all from war and brought peace. So they worship these omens, and there's this abbey and an abbess, and she brings in 6 diviners every 10 years, and basically their job is to connect with the omens psychically and predict people's future and say whether or not the omens favour them. And at the start of the book, a new king has come into power, and he's actually really young, and he comes to the abbey to have his fortune read, and he finds out that the omens absolutely do not favour him. And shortly after his visit, the diviners start going missing one by one, and the main character has to team up with the knights and the king to figure out what is going on. And I just love this book so much. I would also say it gives spring vibes because it just takes place a lot outside. There's a lot of like flowers and nature themes, and it talks a lot about like water and stuff. But this definitely is a more gothic, dark spin on that aesthetic. Okay, this next one's a bit funny because the first book actually takes place in winter, but I promise this whole series as a whole gives spring vibes, and that is the Emily Wilde trilogy. I have not stopped talking about this on my channel because I read it in February and became obsessed. Yeah, the first book is set in winter, but the next 2 books just give spring vibes. Like, look at the covers, especially the third one. But yeah, this one definitely follows or falls into honestly both of the categories, but it feels like spring because not only is it like aesthetically a bit like spring, but also it takes place so much out in nature. The main character is constantly exploring in forests and talking to different fae that live in the forests, and there's just different animals, and yeah, there's just a lot of exploring nature in these books, which just gives me spring vibes. This follows Emily Wilde, and she's a scholar of fairies, and this is a historical adult fantasy, and it is cozy fantasy, but there's also high stakes, which is what I like. But yeah, basically she travels to Norway because she's writing an encyclopedia of fairies, and she needs to travel there to get some information on these fairies that haven't really been studied before, so it would be a good addition to her encyclopedia. And basically her academic rival follows her out there and just causes a lot of disturbances to her. But the series is amazing overall, and if you like cozy fantasy with a little higher stakes, then I definitely recommend. And yeah, I just love the nature vibes of these books. I would also recommend The Daughter of the Moon Goddess duology, and this is an adult fantasy duology based off of Chinese mythology, and it follows the main character who is basically living in secret, which is yet again one of my favourite tropes. Basically, her mum is this goddess who was exiled and banished from the celestial kingdom before she was born, and no one in the kingdom actually knows of her existence. But one day she has to flee her home and go to the kingdom and train with the emperor's son, basically undercover, and not let anyone know who her mother is because that would lead to bad things. But I remember loving this book. I read it over 2 years ago, but I read it in one day, and it is a chunky book. I just couldn't put it down. It's so fast paced, and also it has this unexpected love triangle, and I honestly love triangles when they're I honestly love love triangles when they're done right, and this one, in my opinion, was done right. And last on the list is The Wild Ones, which I read honestly about 3 years ago now, but I remember really enjoying it. And also, this cover is one of the prettiest covers I own. Like, the cover alone just gives spring vibes, like all the flowers and the pretty purples. I love it so much. But basically, this one's quite unique where we're following the perspective of multiple people at the one time. So it says, like, we do this and we do that. They're like a collective character, if that makes sense. But it starts with the main character who basically gets betrayed by her mum and sold into marriage, and she runs away and she meets this boy who basically grants her access to another realm, like another magical realm, and she basically makes it her life mission to collect girls who are going through tough times in the same way that she did, and basically saves them, and it's just their mission to go around saving people. But then the boy shows back up in their lives, and he's basically on the run, he's being hunted down, and he needs their help. I just find it so interesting that a book can be like set from the perspective of multiple people, but it's speaking as if they are the one person. I just find that really interesting and unique, and yeah, it's probably one of the only books I've read with a perspective like that. Yeah, those are my spring book recommendations. Let me know if you have any more, because I love spring based books, like just the nature and the florals and the folklore vibes. I just love it so much.